And welcome back, rugby fans, to Rugby411. As always, I'm your host. My name is Joshua Shibata, and this is week 14 in the books of the Major League Rugby 2024 season. Just 4 weeks left in the season. We are getting very, very close to that playoff postseason, and only one team so far has cashed in on that playoff berth, which we'll get into in the future. And later on in this video, everyone else is still fighting. Technically, I think one team has already been eliminated, but everybody else technically is still fighting for those very crucial postseason positions. Four in the Western Conference, four in the Eastern Conference. But again, we're getting down to the nitty gritty. Just 4 games left in the season, but still so much left to play for. Not a lot of movement in the playoff rankings, just small movements here and there. But a good week of MLR rugby to talk about. Everybody was playing except for two teams. Chicago Hounds, Seattle Seawolves were both on byes. This is also the last week where we'll have byes. The last 4 weeks of the season, everybody's playing, so 6 weeks, 6 games per week. It will be again an exciting finish to what has been a pretty exciting MLR season. Again, if you've never seen my power ranking videos, is based purely on what you do on the pitch, who you play against, who you beat, where do you play them, and how hot of a winning streak you've been on. Certain teams have been really just riding momentum to come up. Some teams have faltered quite a bit. Some teams are bouncing back. Right now, it is again rugby. If you've ever watched it, especially Major League Rugby, is a game of attrition. So many teams struggling with injuries. I think every team, with the exception of Houston, which explains why they are in the position that they're in, I think every team is suffering from at least 2 to 3 significant injuries, season-ending injuries to significant players. And then, of course, a bunch of injuries here and there that have caused a lot of players to miss a lot of game time. And that's really kind of affected the momentum of some of these teams. Certain teams like the Seattle Seawolves have really faltered simply because of just the lack of star power. Some teams have recruited new players to come in. We'll see how that works. But again, as I mentioned before, it really is Major League Rugby, a season of attrition. It's not necessarily how you start the seasons, how well you finish, and how many of your players are still able to play. It really does play a big key into how everyone winds up in the postseason. So, without further ado, let's go over our rankings. Again, still in the number 12 spot, Carolina Anthem. Unfortunately, still have not found that winning game, that first game winning of the season. They played against Old Glory DC, losing 47-29. Now, this game was pretty competitive from the start. Carolina has really shown, and I keep telling you guys, again, an experimental team, a bunch of young, potential American-born, potential future Eagles. And again, shout out to the under-20 American team. I made a brief mention of it on my YouTube channel in the community section, but the under-20 American team defeating the under-20 Canadian team in the first of 2 games in a North American qualifier, thank you, to play in the World Rugby Under-20 Trophy Tournament, which is technically the second tier to the Under-20 Championship, where the best under-20s team, and this is basically players that are under the age of 20, for most countries is basically the junior team of the national team. There is no older level of under 20 except the actual national team itself. So it's the highest level right before you get into the big leagues. And it's really a great chance to give young potential future national players a chance to get into that world competition, international competition. And the under-20 championship is the top tier. There is a secondary tier, which is the trophy. Goal of the second tier teams is to ultimately win the trophy to get into the championship tournament. USA is not quite there yet, though USA has made a couple of appearances in the championship, Right now, they're in the trophy tournament, but they still have to qualify for this year. They still have one more game against Canada. I'm filming this right now, Wednesday. Tomorrow on Thursday, they're playing in Canada. Hopefully, they win that one and qualify to play in the Under 20 trophy tournament with other teams like Kenya, Scotland, Japan. I believe Hong Kong is also in it as well. Some, again, teams that are really on the rise in USA. Again, the more that we get the younger players to develop, especially on that international level competition, the better they're going to be once they get to the Eagles and hopefully in time for that 2031 World Cup hosted here in America. Now, let's get back to Carolina. Carolina in the game against Old Glory scores 2 tries right off the bat. So, again, they've been showing a lot of promise. It's just, unfortunately, like in this game, ran out of gas. Old Glory scored 2 tries to pretty much tie the game by half. And then it was pretty much all Glory. Carolina did have 2 amazing tries by Namibian fly half Seo Sinai, who is actually, I believe, who is really a talented player for Carolina. Unfortunately, that wasn't enough. Like I mentioned before, Old Glory wins 47-29. Carolina did get a bonus point for that, but I believe right now the way that it works, with only 4 games left, I believe Carolina is out of contention for the playoffs. The only team that is that, which is unfortunate for Carolina. But again, it's a growing team for them. I mentioned before, if they stay with the core players that they have right now, and a few of the players weren't able to play because they are playing in Canada, getting ready for that that under 20 game against the Canadian team. But there is a lot of great potential in this Carolina squad, and I believe definitely next year they're going to win at least a couple games and really show their improvement. But Carolina still, unfortunately, 0-12, looking for that first win of the season. They stay at the number 12 spot. Now, sliding down from number 6 all the way to number 11, the Miami Sharks are your number 11 team, sliding down after a loss to fellow new kids on the block. Yours truly, the RFC-LA team. Miami slides down to the 11th spot, losing to LA 15-45. Biggest point margin win for the RFC-LA, which is great for us, not so great for Miami. Again, the reason why I had to slide down so far is because of the lopsided loss, and of course, I don't believe in Chicago and Seattle teams that are on a bye moving up or moving down, so they kind of have to be there, which means if you do lose and you're kind of above them, you fall quite severely. In the end, it works out. Miami, I felt were competitive in the game. I mean, Miami was playing really, really well against LA. Game ended up being tied at the half, 10-10. And then second half, after Miami scored the first opening try in the second half, it was all LA. LA just unloaded, almost like they just were not going to give any mercy to Miami. And it really felt like Miami just kind of gave up in that game at the end. So it ended up being a very lopsided score of 45-15. I'll go a little bit more into detail once I get to the LA team, once I show you how high they went up because of the impressive performance. But Miami, again, they are still in contention, but barely. But they are still in contention. They have 21 points in the season, 4 games left. They do have the opportunity to still kind of sneak in. They're only 7 points. They're only 9 points away from Old Glory. It's not an easy task for them, but it's not impossible for them to still make their way into that playoff position. Moving down a spot from number 11 to number 10, the Utah Warriors, who fell to the San Diego Legion in Utah, 20-27. Now, this game was pretty interesting because it was actually a surprisingly very, very close game. Utah scored in the first 10 minutes. San Diego scored right back. It seems to be a running theme of the week. 10-10 tie, and then after a couple of penalty kicks, Utah was able to score. Unfortunately, a brace by Kieran McClay, and then even though Utah was up, surprisingly they just let their defense kind of fall through as they allowed Vila Helu of San Diego to score pretty much out of nowhere. The game is end up tied, and then as we go into extra time, San Diego just was able to score in the dying seconds, in the early seconds of the extra time. Almost looked like Utah just kind of just completely stopped playing, which was weird. But San Diego is considered the comeback kids. This is, again, another win that San Diego had to come from behind to get this win, and San Diego was able to walk out of Zion Stadium 27-20. Utah only slides down one spot because they felt, unlike the Miami game, Utah actually looked pretty impressive, which is surprising because Utah has been struggling a lot. I believe this is their fourth game that they've lost in a row. A lot of injuries for Utah. San Diego's dealing with a lot of injuries as well. But yeah, Utah unfortunately falling short to San Diego, so they fall down a spot. Old Glory moves up. Actually, Old Glory stays where they are at the number 9 spot after thumping after thumping Carolina 47-29. Now again, it comes to this where 47-29, yes, is a pretty impressive score, but you're going against a team who hasn't even won a game yet. And technically, Carolina kind of kept it close in the first half before Old Glory pulled away. Again, I don't feel like moving Chicago or Seattle because of the bye. I don't feel the win by Old Glory warrants them to jump that high up to number 6. So unfortunately for Old Glory, they don't move up a spot, but they also don't go back a spot after defeating Carolina 47-29. As I mentioned before, Seattle and Chicago are both on byes, and so then that means your new number 6 team jumping up from number 10 after a very impressive performance against the Miami Sharks, fellow new team on the block, 45-15. It was a struggle at first, and unfortunately, right at the very beginning of the game, team captain Niall Saunders, their fly half, got a really bad head knock that took him out of the rest of the game. I spoke to him after the game. He said he's okay. It's just taking precaution. Again, LA is another team that's been struggling with a lot of injuries. They couldn't afford to lose somebody as valuable as Niall Saunders. Also, too, Niall Saunders was out. Dan Hollinshead is out. Jordan Chait is out. Those are all the people that are usually kickers for LA. But in walks Jason Ewok Emery, and not to poke fun at you, Jason, but literally hobbled him because he's been dealing with a pretty bad knee injury. But man, you wouldn't know it because Jason Ewok Emery was clutch. 6 for 6, a perfect 6 for 6 off the tee. 13 points, including some amazing conversion kicks that I honestly did not know how Jason was able to make it. He made it look easy. The game was 10-10. And like I said, Miami scored in the second half, but after that, it was all LA. 4 tries scored in the second half, 6 total, including a try scored by Semi Kunatani, who's been phenomenal. He is the MVP of the team by far. It was his 8th try of the season. He is second, tied with Philemone of New Orleans, just behind Dewal Coatsy of Dallas. Also, too, a try scored by Andrew Coe, who hasn't scored in a while, and Jack Shaw and Austin White as well. As I mentioned before with the Miami, it really did seem like Miami kind of gave up in the last half, which allowed LA to score. LA still struggling a little bit with penalties. There was a yellow card, unfortunately, with LA. But again, LA is a very offensive, potent team. It's just they got to have that mojo, that momentum to kind of drive them through. And as I mentioned before, Miami did kind of give up in the end. That allowed LA to kind of walk over with the win. But it was a good win. As I mentioned before, largest point margin for LA, largest score for LA as well so far in their very short franchise history. Moving up to number 6, which I also believe is the highest that they've been so far on my power rankings. Now, dropping down a spot to number 5, Dallas Jackals losing to New England 24-26. Now, the score looks pretty close, but if you really watch the game, it wasn't really as close as it seemed. New England and Dallas. New England was actually up 10-7. Actually, I'm sorry. Dallas was up 10-7 in the first half, but then in the second half, it was really all New England. 3 tries scored in the first 10 minutes. Dallas scored a couple of tries to try to come back, but to me, it really felt after those 3 tries that were scored, which brought the score up 26-7 by that point, I felt that New England kind of took the foot off the gas, and Dallas ended up scoring some, again, kind of lazy tries that New England let go. But New England was able to get the win in that one, keeping them on top of the Eastern Conference. Dallas got a bonus point, which allowed them to stay a little bit ahead of Utah and LA, who are both tied at the bottom of that Western Conference. But they're only 6 points away from Dallas, which is still very attainable so far in the last 4 weeks of the season. As I mentioned before, New England was able to win, so they moved up from number 3 to number 4. Impressive performance by them. And then in the next game, in the number 3 spot, again, I didn't feel that San Diego warranted to move up after their win over Utah because, again, it was a very, very close game. Utah almost beat San Diego, so I didn't feel this win warranted them to move up, which leaves your number 1 and number 2, which was the game of the week between your 2 top teams in my power rankings, Houston SaberCats, NOLA Gold. In the end, kind of a lackluster game. Houston was able to beat NOLA 21-7. All the points were scored in the first half of the game. Second half of the game was pretty much just a sloppy mess because of weather. A lot of handling errors. In the end, Houston was able to hold on 21-7. And therefore, they stay on top and they clinch a playoff berth. First team to do so in the season. Only team with just 1 loss and 11 wins, 52 points, a plus point margin of 123. Houston has been the dominant team in the season, which is a surprise to me. NOLA, very surprising being as high as they are. They are still sitting second place in the Eastern Conference, just 6 points behind New England. Almost pretty much securing themselves a playoff spot in the Eastern Conference, which was more of a surprise for me. If you look at my way too early season predictions, I didn't think NOLA was going to be as good as they had been so far. Now, we don't have the yellow card tracker this time or counter this time because it wasn't an impressive yellow card. This was actually a pretty even kill, pretty mellow week when it comes to penalties and yellow cards. I think there's only 5, even though there was a red card that was given out, but 5 comparatively to the last 2 weeks of 11 and 10. Definitely cut down, and it was 5 games. So, I mean, it was almost a full slate of games. But here is your power rankings. Again, it ends up looking pretty much similar to what the standings are. You have Houston up there, NOLA and New England are fighting for that first place in the East. Seattle is hobbling a little bit, even though they're second in the conference. They are on a losing streak right now, or they've been losing a little bit in the last couple of games. I believe they're 1-2 in the last 3 games. Seattle has slid down a bit. NOLA is second, like I mentioned before. Dallas and San Diego are fighting for a spot. LA is also potentially in the playoff hunt as well. So yeah, I mean, I'm comfortable with these power rankings, and they look pretty solid to me. Now let's go over our SuperBru of the week. Bam! And congratulations to a good friend of mine, Frisco Flame, getting the golden cap of the week out of 14.5 points possible, 8.5. Way to go, brother. Barely narrowing out 3 players who tied for second. JZS, who's our number 1 player of the league so far, KDC, and Mr. Rugby. And then in 5th position with 6.5 points, CrossFox, who I haven't said his name in a while. So congratulations to you guys. Unfortunately, John Hawk, unfortunately had the wooden spoon this week. Did not help him at all. So with that being said, our top 5 really got shooken up. We'll look at that. Bam. And number 1 is still JZS, but because of that impressive performance this week, last week he was only a 0.8 point ahead of the second place BT Woodrow. He has jumped to 4 points, 4.8 points ahead of BT Woodrow, who's still in second place with 73.08. Maxman out of nowhere jumping up 5 spots to number 3 with 70. Villaferrero goes up a couple of spots to number 4, 69.5, and then another huge jump because of his performance this week. Mr. Rugby jumps up 7 spots to get that number 5 spot is 69.08. But JZS is taking a little bit of a lead now. 4 points ahead of number 2. From 2 to 5, only separated by less than 4 points. So it's still anybody's game, guys. And we have 6 games per week for the last 4 weeks. So a lot of points left to obtain in our standing. I'll look at the bottom 5 as well. Bam. Nothing's really changed with that. It's still Sunshine with 4.5. Sunshine with 54.5. Hugo with 50. Leon 46.25. Wild Thing 37.25. And then Sunshine 2 with 29. I am just slightly ahead of Sunshine, but I am narrowing in on Red. So Red, coming for you, brother. But those are our final standings of this week. And again, thank you everyone who has been taking part in my SuperBru Pick'em. Don't forget, again, we do have a full slate of 6 games, like I mentioned before, a lot to play for. So that's it for our week of review. Again, thank you very much for checking out my video, and I'll see you on the pitch.